Hey, good evening and welcome to Showtime TV Productions. I'm your host, Omar Rashada. This evening, I'm joined by two distinguished gentlemen. We're going to be talking about the topic of gambling and substance abuse addiction, overcoming gambling and substance abuse addiction. I have two distinguished guests who have a lot of experience in this field. We have Odom and we have Hector Garcia. Gentlemen, good evening and thank you for tuning in and being a guest for tonight's program.
Good evening. How you doing?
Thanks for having us.
Oh, no problem at all. Okay, we're going to start off with Hector. Just give a brief note of who you are, how long you've been working in the field, and what is it that you currently do, and then we're going to go to Odom.
Okay. I'm Hector Garcia. I am working with the Delaware Council on Gambling Problems, which is based out of the Community Services Building on 10th Street in Wilmington. We also have an office down in Georgetown. We just opened up a couple of months ago. I wear two hats for the organization. I'm their treatment expansion services director. All that means is I drive a lot. I go all over the state to different facilities, kind of preaching the gospel about gambling. Everybody gets the drugs and the alcohol, but they never connect the dots to the gambling. I'm also one of their treatment providers. There's only 4 of us currently. Soon, hopefully, Mr. Odom will be one of those as well. So we, as an organization, provide treatment services to Delawareans and their families for people who have been impacted by gambling addiction.
Okay, great. Okay, Audwin.
Yes, so my name is Audwin Odom, and I am currently a healthcare coordinator with Highmark Health Options. I am a social worker by trade, and what I do is I help people with severe mental illness and substance abuse get their healthcare needs and mental health needs, as well as substance abuse or addictions at rest. Okay. I'm a certified drug and alcohol counselor. So, like I said, I have my LMSW as a social worker, and I've been in the field for, I think, 17 years. I have 22 years sobriety myself. I experienced addiction myself. So.
Okay. All right. So I want to stay with you also. This is going to be a very educational and informative program. So I want to ask you, what is a substance abuse addiction? If you can define what it is, because I never assume that people know what is addiction. You know, they may have heard the word addiction, but they might not necessarily understand the terms of what addiction actually means. So just tell us, those who are watching, what is a substance abuse addiction? Then Hector, I want to go to you and ask you, what is a gambling addiction?
Okay.
Audwin? I'm going to start with Audwin.
So, well, you know, it's a lot of textbook definitions,
right?
But you know, addiction is being unable to control the use of a substance. And when I say control, you know, you probably have heard of individuals who are social drinkers. They can go out and they can have one drink and stop at that one drink. A person who suffers from the disease of addiction cannot stop at one. You know, one of the sayings in AA and NA is one is too many, 1,000 is never enough. And, you know, I find that quote to be true, because if you ever experience addiction, you know you just can't stop.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, Hector, gambling addiction.
Okay, and I forgot to say prior that I've been working in this field for close to 25 years.
Okay.
And like Audwin, I'm a person in long-term recovery myself, 30 years clean and sober. So I didn't learn everything in a book. You know, my 25 years of personal experience comes, personal research kind of comes in hand. Now, someone with a gambling addiction, we can pick apart all the differences. What I like to do are make the connections. And to me, it's the same animal, just dressed up in different clothes. Specifically with gambling, you're not ingesting a substance like a drink or a drug, but it impacts the brain in a similar fashion. It impacts the reward system in the brain, just like drugs and alcohol do. Everybody gets the reality of the opiate crisis that's been going on for quite some time now. We probably all know someone who's died of an overdose. And it's really impacted our society. But nobody ever connects the dots about the severity of the gambling. And the gambling, to me, can be quite insidious. I like to say there's no overdose with the gambling. And here's what I mean. I always ask people, if I give you $100,000 and you had 30 days, can you do that much heroin? And everybody looks at me and they know, well, absolutely not. You'll overdose and die. Can you drink that much alcohol? Well, no, you'll die. If you had $100,000 in 30 days, can you gamble that much? And everybody says, absolutely. So that's a difference. And it impacts our entire population. You know, our seniors are truly at risk because they're lonely. They may not be as connected to the technology. And you go to the casinos and, you know, they'll valet park your car for you, give you that free little drink, and you kind of lose track of time because there's no clocks in there. You don't even know if it's day or night, and you kind of get lost in a zone. Similarly to when you're doing certain types of drugs, you kind of get in that zone and you lose track of time. So it can be extremely dangerous. Gamblers have a higher rate of suicidal ideation than any other group because of the amount of money that you can go through so quickly. So there's parallels, but there are some differences.
Okay, I want to stay with you, Hector, because when I was thinking about the show, one of the things that crossed my mind is what are the most common gambling issues? For example, is it racetrack? Is it lottery tickets? Is it betting on horses? What are some of the main gambling issues that people go through?
Okay. It's kind of individualized, but we are actually saturated with this now. Historically, it used to be like the track, and then they brought the casinos in. And it's an oversimplification, but there's two types of gamblers, action and escape. Your escape gambler kind of zones out. Those are slots because it's not about competition. You just kind of sitting there in that zone. So for a lot of seniors, that's appeals to them. If you've ever been to a casino, you may notice, you know, especially during the day, it's what I call senior daycare. They're like all over the place. Now, grandma might not even be able to walk 10 feet without having to call the ambulance, but they putting in the laps in those casinos. They got carrying their oxygen tanks. It's the greatest thing I've ever seen for pain management. They're not feeling anything until they leave. So the slots, again, not about competition, but that's kind of zoned you out. So if you have any medical issues, if you have anything going on with relationship troubles or money issues, you're not thinking about it. You kind of zoned out. For younger people, you know, if you're a sports fan, which I am, you know, we've got sports betting now in Delaware, and it is morphing and changing. Like with baseball, you don't even have to bet on the outcome of the game. You can bet on innings. We've got fantasy sports. This even expands to, you know, if you have children or grandchildren, you need to be mindful about what they're doing on their computers. If you take the B and the L out of the word gambling, you've got gaming. Are they spending money on the games? It's a different kind of currency, but they're buying weapons. They're taking their parents' credit cards, and you got to be careful with that. And they kind of zone out and lose track of time as well. You know, so the sports betting is very popular. We've got in the casinos, you've got, you know, the table games. There's still like an underground circuit. When COVID hit, for example, and the casinos shut down, What happened was they reverted back to old school types of gambling, and they had house games. When I came to Delaware in 1975 in the Air Force, I got kind of caught up in the pity pat, spades, tonk, and bid whist circuit. There's cultural differences too with the gambling.
Yeah.
So it's everywhere. When I'm talking to white folks, it's usually, and not always, nothing's always, not trying to stereotype, I'm just saying, but for the most part, it's poker and blackjack. When I'm talking to people of color, like I said, pity pat, spades, tonk, bid whist, it's a different kind of thing. There are cultural differences. People still do the numbers, got the 3-digit, 4-digit, Powerball, all this stuff. I mean, it's everywhere you go. You can't escape it. And you don't even have to go to a brick and mortar casino. If you have a phone, you don't even have to leave your house.
Wow.
So that's the danger. It was just a few years ago, Roger Goodell with the NFL was saying, we're going to want no part of this gambling stuff. Well, they're kind of in bed with them now. They've partnered with DraftKings and FanDuel. Mm-hmm. So it's prevalent. It's everywhere. It's almost part of the culture. I live in Dover, and people are always saying there's nothing to do in Dover except go to Dover Downs. There's a million things to do. It just doesn't give you the juice that does. Right. And my conceptualization about addiction in the first place, it's not very clinical, but I think it makes sense to the people I work with. I call it the hole in the soul. Something's missing. And whatever's going on in my life, if my reality isn't what I'd like it to be, how can I change how I feel instantly? Give me a drink, give me a drug, let me place a bet, let me have the Amazon truck come to my house 20 times a day. Any of those things can change how you feel.
Okay, so Audwin, I want to go to you and ask you the same question in terms when it comes to substance abuse addiction. Is it more common through your experience seeing people struggle more with cocaine, crack, marijuana? I mean, what's the most common substance abuse issues that you encounter on a personal level, or just through your research and studies?
Well, as Hector said, it's individualized. As I said, I work with mainly severely mental health issue individuals who also have co-occurring disorders or comorbid disorders where they use anywhere from heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, crack, marijuana, right now the opioid epidemic is really prevalent because you hear more about it, but you can't minimize the person who smokes 10 grams or more of marijuana a day, along with cocaine, or the person who drinks a pint of vodka or more daily. It's just a hideous disease. One of the things I was looking at earlier, addiction is one of the only diseases that we have. It's like being in prison. You're under lock and key, but the bars are not external, they're internal. And you don't see what's going on with the individual, but it's just prevalent.
One of the things that Hector raised, which I always wondered, was the cultural differences when it comes to addiction. So in terms of substance abuse, are African Americans more inclined to use certain drugs versus whites versus Hispanics and so on?
I don't think it has a face.
Okay.
It's I mean, in high prominent areas, you might see an increase of cocaine because people have access to money, or heroin. But with you know, just you got to think of substance abuse like this. You know, I'm gonna use myself as an example. Back in 1992, I had an injury on the job where I almost lost my arm, and I was introduced to pain medications, right? Percocet, Valium, and various items like that. Also drink. And, you know, after a while, I built up a tolerance where the Percocet wasn't doing any good. So I needed something stronger, you know. So that's what's happening today. You know, we go to you know, a person gets injured, they go to the medical doctor and they're prescribed the medication. And then after a while, they build up a tolerance. And then later, they can't have that medication anymore. So, you know, then you turn to street drugs.
Okay, you run out of prescriptions. And actually, the heroin's cheaper.
Yeah.
And you can get it wherever you want. And there's even a connection with the drugs to gambling. Because even when my younger clients say, oh, I don't gamble, I don't know why I need to listen to you. I'm saying, hold on. When you go see the dope man, do you take a chemical analysis kit with you to see what he stepped on it with? Might that be the biggest gamble of your life? Because you don't know what's in that stuff. And today, more so than not, Audwin can attest to this. I don't even know if they're getting heroin. They're getting fentanyl, which is causing more overdoses because it's more powerful. So that's a gamble in itself.
Now, I want to ask you two both. You mentioned the opiate crisis, and just doing my research, and you guys are way more inclined to understand this more so than me. So let me ask the two experts. There are those, I guess, Suboxone and methadone are used to treat opiates, and there are those who would say that, well, what you're doing is you're replacing one addiction with another. What's your take?
Well, you know, one of the things that I look at, Omar, is each individual has a different path to take to find their recovery. You know, and with medical science, you know, having medical assisted treatment, harm reduction treatment, you know, it works for some, where for some it may not work. You know, I feel whatever works, you know, whatever path you need to take to achieve the common goal is out there. You know, back in the day, old school, you know, yeah, you use a methadone, you still an addict. But I don't feel that's true. You know, you use methadone for a period of time, then you titrate down, and then later on, you don't have to use methadone anymore. For some you might have to use methadone your whole life, you know, but you're still in recovery.
Yeah. Medication assisted treatment is a viable option, not an option for everyone. You know, the methadone, you know, it blocks the opiate receptor sites in the brain, which means if you use, you're not getting high if you're dosed correctly. Now, it doesn't block cocaine. It doesn't block benzos, you know, like Xanax or weed. So it serves a purpose, and they came out with this years ago to decrease crime, and it was a health issue. So whatever works is whatever works for you. As Audwin says, you could get on this methadone, Suboxone, or the Vivitrol shot, which you get once a month. And if you want to come off of that, titrate off of it, that's wonderful. Theoretically, you can stay on it your entire life. It's an individual choice. There's more than one path to recovery.
You know, Hector, we talked earlier about substance abuse and mental health. Audwin mentioned co-occurring disorders. Gambling addiction, could that lead to a mental health disorder?
Well, when somebody walks in my office, I'm a gambling counselor, a nationally certified gambling counselor, but I call myself an addiction counselor. What may walk in my door, we'll call it a gambling issue. but there's other things going on as well. A lot of people use the casino who have like anxiety disorders. Sitting in front of that slot machine, it's what we call emotional regulation. They're able to regulate their feelings and they feel pretty calm. People with ADHD can do the same thing. Now, after you've lost all your money, that ride home is a little different than the ride there. And the ride home, when the realization hits you, you know, I'm broke as a joke. What am I going to do for the rest of the month now? The anxiety increases, the depression deepens. So there's a connection. Some people use it as a means, like I said, of emotional regulation. But these things go hand in hand. Audwin can tell you. Addicts, you know, people with substance use disorders, they have depression, anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder. And I really don't care about the chicken and the egg argument, which came first. It doesn't matter. I treat what's ever in front of me.
Yeah, you know, I work with Hector also as a call taker for the Delaware Council on Gambling. And, you know, and we get calls in from individuals from all over. And, you know, we have a questionnaire and we ask individuals, you know, do you suffer from mental health issues? Or do you suffer from depression? Do you have suicidal thoughts? You know, it's important to ask these questions because, as Hector was saying, it's more than one thing going on besides the gambling. You know, some individuals have other addictions, you know, along with their mental health issues, and they use the gambling as a source of excitement.
Yeah.
But as Hector said, when that excitement is over, with they lost all their money, you know, I got a call about a year ago where the guy, he was crying. He said he had spent $30,000, his life savings. He didn't know how he was going to tell his wife, you know. Wow. And, you know, it was emotional. I was on the phone for about an hour, you know, trying to help this guy get help, you know. And it's a tough disease.
Right. You know, there may be those who have a substance abuse issue or a gambling issue who may not know that they're addict in those respected areas. So I want to start off with Audwin, then Hector. Audwin, can you give us some warning signs for those who may have a substance abuse issue or addiction? And Heather, what are the warning signs for those who may have a gambling addiction?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Audwin.
Well, you know, I'm just going to speak from my experience.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, at first I didn't realize I had a problem. I'm an ex-military man. I was in the Marine Corps, and you know, I grew up in a culture where when I left home and went in the Marine Corps, it was okay to drink alcohol, right? Our pastime was to drink, have fun, what we call party, you know, and then it got to a point where I couldn't just stop, you know. Okay. The drinking had to continue, you know. First it was on the weekends, and then it graduated to 2 or 3 days out of the week. Okay. And then it graduated to daily. So, you know, it's a progressive disease, right? You know, one of the things that you know, I also help people with smoking addiction, which is another disease, right? And you know, it's, you know, I can remember a time when they had bubblegum cigarettes, and you put it in your mouth, you mimic what your parents were doing. Then the next thing you know, you're picking up a real live cigarette, and now you're smoking. And eventually, you know, it becomes part of your system where you have to have that to function, right? So, yeah, I'll just leave it there. Hey, Hector, go.
All right. Some of the warning signs. I'm just going to read this off. This is from the diagnostic criteria from this book called the DSM-5. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of all these things. You know, you need to gamble with increasing amounts of money in order to get to achieve the desired effect. You know, you need to do more and more. You know, one of the hallmark things is the frequency and the amount increases. And you can say the same thing about gambling, drinking, or drugs. That's becoming a problem. Instead of doing it once a week on a Saturday, now you're doing it every other day, then every day of the week. So it's a progression. Not everybody's at the same place. But when this becomes more of a priority in your life, then that's problematic, as in anything. You know, when you're restless or irritable when attempting to cut down or stop. If you have an addiction, you know, with the opiates, and we have a snowstorm and there's 2 feet of snow on the ground, do you simply say, well, the weather's bad out there, I think I'll wait a couple days till, you know, the snow plows come through before I go get my dope? Oh, hell no. You out there shoveling the snow to the dope man's house. You know, nothing stops you. It is the priority, not your family, not the job, not anything. You know, you've made repeated unsuccessful attempts to control, cut back, or stop gambling. A lot of us at some point in time kind of get the realization. We have these moments of clarity where we realize, you know, this is a problem. And I would do the same thing, especially late at night when I'm feeling sorry for myself. I'm saying, tomorrow I got to be a better man. And I'm praying to God and making promises, and wake up the next day. What happened to that resolve that I had? It goes out the window. I got to go get high. I got to go get something to drink. You know, so it goes out of the window. It's driving the bus, not you. When you become preoccupied with this thing, you're thinking about it more and more and more. I used to go to work, and I couldn't wait till I'm getting off of work. Couldn't wait till it's lunchtime. Couldn't wait till it's break time. I'm sneaking stuff on the job to get off. You know, it becomes the priority. You often gamble when feeling distressed, anxious, depressed, guilty, helpless. You can say the same thing about the drugs and the alcohol. When people are feeling, as they say these days, some kind of way, what can you do to change how you feel? Instantly. Give me a drink, give me a drug, let me place a bet, you know, whatever. It doesn't solve anything. It's a temporary solution that only compounds the problem. The problem's still there. Recovery requires a lot of courage because we have to sit still and face our lives. Addiction is about escape. I don't want to deal with none of this mess, but it doesn't go away. You know, after you lose money, you often return another day to get even. We call that chasing our losses. Well, you can apply that concept to drugs and alcohol too. You know, talking about crack. I remember that first one, it was fantastic. And I kept trying to chase that high. I could never quite get that same blast. You know, so you keep trying to chase it. You lie to conceal the extent or your involvement with gambling. We do the same thing with the drugs and the alcohol. We're lying to everybody. Damn near everything that's coming out of our mouth is a lie. You know, how can you tell they're lying? You know, if their lips are moving, that's a pretty good sign. I got to the point where I couldn't differentiate what was true or a lie. It's a lot of work, the lies you got to tell to keep this thing going. You know, when you jeopardize or lose a significant relationship, job, educational, or career opportunity because of your addiction. You know, we don't win prizes and trophies for being good addicts. Life kind of goes downhill. It doesn't get better. There is one unique difference about the gambling that I need to throw in here. There is no way in the world, if you do heroin, that your life improves. There is no way if you drink or do any other drugs, methamphetamine, cocaine, whatever, that your life improves. But there is the remote possibility that you could hit a jackpot when you gamble. And people keep chasing that distorted thinking. And it turns into a lot of magical distorted thinking. You know, I saw 3 7s on a license plate. Must be a sign from God that, you know, I'm supposed to go to the casino. I got to play that number 712 because my baby's son was 7 pounds and 12 ounces. You know, like that has anything to do with anything. It has nothing to do with nothing. But the thinking becomes distorted, and we suffer from another illness. It's called brilliant thinking. You know, our thinking gets very distorted. So those are some of the hallmarks, you know, and we impact other people's lives. The biggest lie that addicts will say is, I'm hurting nobody but myself. We hurt everybody on so many levels. Every time Audwin and I get somebody to buy into what we're selling and they embrace recovery, it then impacts another 10, 20, 30 people. Because then they're a better spouse, father, mother, sister, brother, son, daughter, neighbor, co-worker, whatever. That's how we make the world a better place, one person at a time.
Yeah. You know, one of the things, you know, it's a lonely disease.
Yeah.
But with help, you know, I always say it's a we program. You
Absolutely.
know, we need each other to make it through this disease. You know, I was looking at the DSM, and it was saying addiction is defined as the chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking, continued use despite harmful consequences,
right,
and long-lasting changes in the brain. It is considered both a complex brain disorder and a mental illness. You know, the harmful consequences that a person goes through, and not everyone goes through a harmful consequence. You know, some people may not hit what they call rock bottom. You know, some people just harm themselves, you know, physically. You know, this disease eats you up from the inside out. You know, and one of the things that I look at, actually, I have a friend of mine who is in seasoned hospice now. And him and I used years ago, over 30 years ago, and he has since quit. But the damage that he done to his body prior to has caught up with him now. You know, his liver's failing, his kidneys are failing, and he has 1 lung. And they only gave him 3 to 4 months to live. You know, and he told me Monday when I was visiting him, he said, you know, I can't outrun this one. You know, I had to deal with the consequences. And, you know, he was telling me he's not afraid of dying, but he's thinking about what he could have changed years ago, and he didn't. You know, so for some of us, you know, it's too late. You know, all people don't recover from this disease.
No.
Right.
You know, and that's another thing you have to look at. You know, as Hector said, we can just help just one. It's a victory for us, for the whole world. You know,
Right.
And there's there's different bottoms. Not everybody's bottom's the same.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just happen to be one of those people in my addiction that needed to get hit in the head with the sledgehammer 75 times before I figured out it hurt. I was what I call stupidly stubborn. You know, I didn't have no problem. Addiction is the only illness that has to be self-diagnosed. Everybody telling you got a problem. Family, friends, employers, criminal justice system, you know, and we just telling them, you know, go do whatever. Until you get it, it doesn't matter what everybody else says. You got to get it. But the bottoms are different. I'm really impressed with a lot of people who don't have to lose everything, go to prison, you know, what have you. But it's a reality, and a lot of people are dying because of this. And families, our communities are severely impacted because of it.
Hector, before I forget, you mentioned cultural differences in gambling. One of the things, I was at the mental health conference about a month ago, and I met one of your coworkers, a female coworker, and she had some literature on gambling. Tia, right. She was supposed to be on the show tonight, but she couldn't make it, unfortunately. But one of the literatures that she had was woman and gambling. It says so when I'm thinking about gambling, I really never thought about a woman having addiction to gambling, because I'm thinking dudes, I'm thinking horse race racing, I'm thinking sports, I'm thinking casinos. I'm just thinking about men, but apparently gambling affects women as well.
Absolutely. Historically, years ago, they tended to be more of the slot players, but now that kind of dynamic's changing somewhat. One of the interesting things about casinos, gambling, and women, you know, our standards, our mores, our morality, whatever is changing. If a woman goes somewhere by herself, like a club, men may think a certain thing about her. Nobody bothers you when you go to the casino if you're a woman. It's one of the safest places they could go, 24 hours a day. Nobody's trying to mess with them because everybody's zoned doing their own thing. But women, yeah, they suffer from this too, especially if there's a lot of abuse in the home. It's their means of escape. When I came to Delaware, I got involved in that pity-pat spade circuit. It was a way for a lot of African-American women to make money for their families.
Oh.
You know, we're serving food, we're taking cuts from the games, selling drinks, you know, especially when not too long ago, the liquor stores in Delaware were closed on Sundays. So it became a way of generating some income.
Mm-hmm. You know, Hector, have you experienced the individuals who sit at say a slot machine and they don't move? They wear the pins. They sit there almost 24 hours just trying to hit that big one.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that's actually changing. Some young people are doing it. This sounds crazy, Omar. You're sitting in front of a slot machine at the casino. And as I said before, there's no clocks, so you don't know what time it is. And you're thinking, you know, this machine's about to hit. So if I get up and go to the bathroom, what's going to happen? My machine's going to hit. Somebody's going to take my spot the minute I move, and they're going to hit the jackpot. So that's that distorted thinking. And they will sit there and relieve themselves without going to the bathroom. And some people will wear Depends so that they don't have to go to the bathroom.
Wow, that's deep. Wow.
That's nasty, but that's the thinking.
Wow. You know, working in this field, one phrase that I heard more than others, burning your bridges. When there are those with substance abuse issues who stole from family members, who caused harm from family members, who family members had to kick out the house, and may have not heard from their family members for 10, 15, 20 years because he or she was such a burden. Do you run across cases as such where, you know, a client has burned his bridges so bad that he or she has no support system?
You know, and yes, I do. Yeah, you know, and one of the things I really thank God for the agencies, the mental health agencies that are out here, the providers that help individuals who struggle with not having any support. You know, I thank God for the rooms of AA and NA, Gambling Anonymous. You know, what happens is you have to build new supports. You have to find an extended family, natural support such as a sponsor. You know, friends who are in recovery who help you, who freely helps you as someone has freely helped them. You know, that's why I said earlier, this is a we program, you know. Yeah. So, you know, us as counselors and therapists, you know, we try to find resources that an individual can tap into, you know, and then he or she then will grow a new foundation, a new family. And you know, like part of the 12 steps is making amends. Sometimes you maybe to make amends and regain some of that family support,
Right.
But other times, as you said earlier, you burn your bridges so much, your family doesn't want anything to do with you, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, you can't let that hinder you from recovery.
Right.
And Hector, I can only imagine the same thing with gambling. So someone might have gambled the mortgage money. So someone may have gambled a new car, and the family say, you know what, I'm through with you.
Well, as I've said before, one of the insidious difference with the gambling is you go through the money quicker. Like I said earlier, I can't spend $100,000 doing dope. I'll die, you know, in a month. I can't do that. But if you had it, you know, you can spend that much. And if you've noticed, I've asked native Delawareans, you know, I told you I'm not from here. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. Came here in '75. But I asked native Delawareans, I said, before the casinos came, did you have all these payday loan places around? And they tell me no. It's what I call desperation economics. People get desperate and they get these payday loans, and they're sometimes 360 something percent. You know, Omar, I'm gonna give you $100 and you owe me back $367. You know, that don't make no sense at all. But because you're so desperate, they're willing to do it. Mm-hmm. And they gotta gamble because they gotta get that money back that they lost. And like I said, they saw 3 7s on a license plate, so it must be a sign from God. It just gets nuts. But the damage is done so quickly. And this really impacts my seniors a lot because it's kind of hard to reinvent yourself when you're in your 70s. You know, you're on a fixed income. Grandmom gets her Social Security retirement check on the 1st or the 3rd. A couple of days later, she's broke as a joke. You know, I've had several people that were living in cars that were seniors. I've had to go back to Luther Towers where they were staying, help them get back in, you know, these facilities. I had to advocate for them and explain to people, addiction is not a moral judgment. You know, it's not a moral deficiency. It's an addiction just like drugs and alcohol. You know, Audwin was talking about we need other people to recover. This whole concept of addiction goes against the natural order of things. Our greatest God-given instinct is survival. We will do anything to continue to live. In addiction, we've twisted it and changed it, and we're slowly doing everything to kill ourselves. We're social beings. We need each other. We need to be touched, to be around folks. In our addiction, we push everybody away. And that in itself is devastating. You know, the greatest gift for me in my recovery was this ability to look at the man in the mirror. Today, I like my own company. I never used to like the man I had become. And I didn't like to sit still because then I had to think about my reality. Go ahead.
You know, I want to ask you, Hector, have you seen an increase? Did you see an increase in gambling during the COVID?
Yes.
Isolation?
Yes. Now I want to make a statement. I work for the Delaware Council on Gambling Problems. I forgot to say this initially. We are gambling neutral, neither for nor against. You can do whatever you want. We're there, if this gets out of hand, you know, to provide treatment services for people. We want to educate people. You know, we offer preventative services. We go into high schools, middle schools. We got all these programs. We're just telling people, if you're going to do this, do it responsibly. All right. One of the last places to close down with COVID were the casinos. Mm-hmm. The first places to open back up were the casinos. So that's why I made my statement. Don't construe that I'm anti-gambling. People can do what they want. We're gambling neutral. But I found that a lot of people, depending on occupation, became desperate. People working in food services. I had a lady who was a waitress and she lost her job because the restaurant shut down. So where can I go to make money? That's not how you do it, because there's no guarantee you're going to win. And then it got worse and worse and worse. The research suggests and tells us that during this pandemic, people are drinking more, they're using more, and they're gambling more. That's just the reality.
Yeah.
I want to talk about treatment. Hector, and gambling, what does treatment look like? Is it individual therapy? Is it group therapy? What should one expect to do when they want to treat themselves for having a gambling addiction?
All right. I'm very proud of our council. We have a hotline, Odin's part of it, that is staffed by live people. So 24 hours a day, you can call this number, 1-888-850-8888. You will get a live person. We try to figure out what area of Delaware you live in so that we can connect you with a counselor. Counseling services cost nothing. I think that's a good price.
Right.
I run a series of groups throughout the state. Like I said, I go to different facilities. I do a 12-step study for gamblers. I've been running a treatment program in Smyrna Prison for over 20 years. And we also refer people to Gamblers Anonymous, which is a 12-step group similar to like AA or NA, because they need to get connected, with other people who share their vision of recovery.
Okay, so Audwin, in terms of substance abuse, inpatient versus outpatient, what's the difference?
Well, inpatient, you're in for 28 days or longer, and you learn 12 steps of recovery. You learn about mental health issues. You learn a variety of coping mechanisms to help you survive. For some individuals, 28 days inpatient may be enough. Just through my experience, it takes at least 90 days or more for an individual to start changing their thinking around. And then another thing you want to look at is one inpatient treatment may not be enough. You might have to go several times. Right. One of the things I tell my guys, I like to use my smokers as examples. It takes 7 to 10 times to quit, to actually quit, right? So you may go through the process of going inpatient, may go through the process of going to outpatient treatment as 12-step in the 12-step communities or a mental health facility, but you just don't want to stop there. Therapists, you want to use counselors. In AA, NA, and even in Gambling Anonymous, you have sponsorship. Utilize other individuals to help you achieve a common goal.
One of the things we talk about treatment is building a therapeutic relationship with the client. For example, I heard one client tell a professional, said, "You don't have substance abuse. You never had substance abuse issues. Therefore, you don't understand what we're going through." And that person could have said the same thing toward me, because I'm a therapist, a counselor who never had a gambling addiction, never had substance abuse issues. So the client may have issues with trust with me because he or she may say, "Omar, look, man, you book smart, but you haven't lived their life." So how can a therapist or counselor go about building a therapeutic relationship, building a trusting relationship with a client? This question is for either one of you who wants to address it.
I'll let Hector go first.
Okay.
All right. If you need to have heart surgery, does that doctor have had heart issues too? Okay. Not necessarily. Now, I do find that my 25 years of what I call personal research, when I was out there lost in the sauce, kind of helps me. I can sort of finish people's sentences for them. And there is a little bit difference from what you learn in school. It doesn't always neatly translate, but this is more about dealing with life in general. You know, you can be empathetic and understanding, and I still think you can make a connection. Now, our research says that it does not matter what type of degree you have or what style of counseling you employ. What's important is what they call the therapeutic alliance. Can you make a connection with that person? And if you do that, that's when it works. If you do not make the connection, it doesn't work. So you may not necessarily have that life experience, but I still think you can relate to it in other ways.
You know, one of the things, Omar, a lot of the individuals I work with, I don't disclose that I suffered from addiction. You know, they might see I have a LMSW or CAADC. Mm-hmm. They might see my credentials on the wall. Not now because of COVID, but you know, those guys who I've worked with for years, just know I went to college and I have a degree. You know, mm-hmm. But one of the keys that I found is actually listening to a person.
Correct.
You know, I think that's really important. You know, hearing what the individual he or she is saying. You know, and then talking to them as an individual. You know, not belittling anyone, not judging anyone is a key. You know, we're all human beings. You know, and I think, you know, even some of my colleagues, when we're in office together, you know, you hear so-and-so has bipolar disorder, or so-and-so is, you know, a drug addict, right? You know, they label the individual, you know, not thinking that this is an individual. This is a human being, you know, so, right. You know, you want to keep that first.
Yeah. And this is a joint process. This isn't about me telling them what they need to do. I need to listen to them about what they want to do. What is it you want to do? This is about them. And I want to partner with them on this journey. You treat them with respect, treat them like people. You don't label them as a diagnosis.
You know, and as I said earlier, everyone's path is different.
Correct.
So, you know, Sally or Joe may come to me and say, Mr. Odom, I failed again. I relapsed again. You know, I don't think I'm going to never get this. You know, one of the things I always say is never give up. You know, mm-hmm. Let me read this quote real quick. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Nothing is impossible. The word itself, I am possible. And that was from R.G. Hepburn. You know, always give an individual a hope, you know, just a little slimmer chance that you can do this. And
I like to say that we're hope merchants. As long as you're breathing, there's hope.
Yeah.
Right. You know, I want to give you two gentlemen an opportunity before we close. You both mentioned that you were in recovery sober for over the last 20 years. So as an individual who abstained from using substances or gambling for 20 years or so, does that bring great joy in your life? And how were you able to do that? I mean, did you get support from the family, or did you just take it day by day? Just, you know, because it's a major accomplishment, and both of you guys are professionals in the field, and you're turning around and you're helping those who need help as you once did in your life. So just talk about your success in terms of abstaining from substance abuse, being able to teach others, being family men. How proud are you of yourselves? Who wants to go first? Whoever can go first.
Well, I would have liked to have chosen a different path, you know, hanging out, being one of the 12 disciples, or hanging out with the Dalai Lama or something, but that has not been my path. You know, my spiritual path has been this. I had to go through what I had to go through to get to who I am today and where I am today. The very thing that damn near killed me and hurt so many other people is the very thing that's given me the life that I have today. It may sound a little crazy, but it's just the way it is. I did not want any part of this recovery thing. I had to be mandated by a judge to get treatment. I wasn't trying to hear it. I didn't want any part of the 12-step stuff. I thought that was some kind of a cult. I didn't have a problem. Everybody else was the problem. But you get to a point in your life where you get beat down enough, you know, it'll get your attention. When I finally started to listen, you know, I realized there were people out here that really cared about me and were able to give me their valuable time. Again, addiction is the ultimate form of selfishness, in my opinion, because in our addiction, we care about no one else, despite the words coming out the side of our neck that we, you know, love our family to death. No, we don't. We love the guy at the dope house in the liquor store or the casino, whatever. And these men worked with me, my sponsor in AA, who guided me through those 12 steps. They only talk about alcohol in the first step. Everything else is about this process of inner transformation. I had to make a decision, you know, to get on board with this stuff. I had to take my inventory when it's real popular today to take everybody else's inventory. We're a culture, a society that loves dirt, drama, and dysfunction. Just look at all the TV shows on reality TV. You know? I had to look at self, and that was the part that was difficult. Then I had to become willing to make these amends, as Audwin is talking about. And that's not a short-term experience that continues for the rest of our lives. But this thing has put me on the path. You know, I never wanted to be a counselor, but that's just how it kind of turned out. And today I'm giving back. It's not about me. You know, I realize it's never been about me. What it's about is, how do I add to the betterment of life on planet Earth? And it's kind of, I view it as a ministry of sorts, you know, because this is a spiritual affliction. We've got that hole in the soul and we're trying to fill it with all this stuff out here. We're externally focused instead of being internally grounded. I'm okay with the guy in the mirror today. I do a lot of driving up and down the whole state. I like spending time with me today, and I never did. The greatest gifts that I have is, you know, I've got a wife that I can come home to, and she's glad to see me. The kids are okay. The grandbabies like being around Pop. You know, as time goes on, people start to trust you. I've got keys to several buildings and churches. It's like, you know, it just amazes me. What are they thinking? Don't they know who I used to be? Yeah. So we can change. And it's about giving back, you know, however we can. We may not find a cure for cancer, but we can make the world a better place in our own homes, in what we do, our interactions with other people, treating our clients with respect and dignity. I wouldn't trade my life today for nothing in the world.
Yeah, I had to ditto that myself. You know, Omar, well, 26 years ago, I almost lost my left arm. I was working for a construction company, and a light fixture went through my arm, and it took me 3 years to gain strength and mobility back, right? But during that process, I met a guy in Wilmington Occupational Therapy, you know, and he knew I was, you know, I was coming to therapy high, you know, looking crazy, telling him all the things that he wanted, that I thought he wanted to hear, that I was doing right, and he knew I was not. He said, "You can get help for what you got," and he wasn't talking about my arm; he was talking about my addiction, you know. And just one day, I listened to him, and he said, "Oh, you're a veteran; you can go here," you know. And I just changed my life around. I followed his lead. I went to rehab, and I didn't do just one rehab, Omar. I went to like several rehabs in the VA, you know, and I think the third time around, I was in rehab and my father died. And I think that really, my father was dying. He didn't die then, but he was dying. Yeah. And that was my awakening. Yeah. You know. Yeah. And I went back to college. I went back to school. You know, I wanted to not only help myself, because I was trying to reinvent myself, yeah, but I wanted to help someone else. And I too have joy today because I have a family. I have two young boys. I have a wife. I never knew that I could still have fun without a substance in my body. You know, I can still laugh and have joy. You know, today I go to parties and I see individuals drink and, you know, and have fun, or they're having fun as they think, you know, getting intoxicated. But I look at them and I don't judge, because that was me at one point. Right. But, you know, they also know if they need help, they can come to me. And that makes me proud to know that I'm here to help someone else. Awesome. I have more to say, but I'm going to stop right there.
Okay. All right. Also, so as we close out, I'm going to start off with Hector. Any closing comments you want to say? And then for those who are watching, if you can give the website, the address, the hours of operation for the organization that you work for.
Recovery is possible, and there's help out here. If you have a gambling issue, you can call us at the Delaware Council on Gambling Problems. You can call our office number, 302-655-3261. You could call our helpline, 1-888-850-8888. You can catch us online, www.deproblemgambling.org. We're on Facebook, Instagram, chat, whatever. We're here 24 hours a day to help, and not just for the gamblers, but for those affected by it as well. We're open to doing presentations in agencies. I do presentations, faith-based presentations, because that's another interesting component. Yeah. People of faith gamble as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, there's nothing in the, you know, I talk to pastors. We have a faith-based conference once a year. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't say anywhere in the Old or New Testament, thou shalt not gamble. It doesn't say it. There's no strict prohibition about it, unlike Islam, you know, which does. But I ask them, how are you being a good steward of what God's given you by going to the casino? In other words, how's the world a better place? Because you're dumping all your money there. And not to be an arbiter of anybody's morality. If you want to do this, that's your choice. Just be careful in what you do. Set your limits. You know, don't stay there forever. But if you ever need help, we're there 24 hours a day. Doesn't cost a penny. I think that's a real good price. You don't need insurance, nothing.
Awesome. Okay, closing comments, and then you know, if any local resources that one can go to if he or she's suffering from substance abuse.
Yeah, you know, the quickest way, Omar, is to call 211. Just call 211 and tell the individual on the phone that you need help, and he or she will connect you to a resource. You know, I'm really proud of the state of Delaware, because now addiction accommodations are really prevalent all throughout the state. You know, and one of the things about insurance companies, if it's not a bed open in the state, you know, they'll approve you in another state. You know, so, and you don't have to have insurance to get help. All you have to do is be willing to want help and make the phone call. You know, yeah. 12 steps of AA and NA, they're still out here, and they're still going strong. They're still helping people every day. You know, just walk through the doors, pick up the phone, call someone, and help us there. All right, gentlemen. So I thank you both for being a guest. You two are two awesome guests. I really enjoyed the program. For those who are watching, please like, subscribe, and share.
All right, guys, have a safe week. And once again, thank you for being a guest on Showtime TV.
Thank you, Omar.
Thank you. Enjoy your night.
God
happy
bless
holidays.
you.
Happy holidays, both of you guys.
Yeah, happy
Both of you,
holidays.
ditto.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you.